"Leave your keys and get out," she said. Her voice didn't crack. No hesitation. Just cold, polished steel wrapped in satin. "This house belongs to me and my new husband now." I stared at her from across the dinner table, the same mahogany slab we'd bought from a boutique in Charleston 4 years ago. Back when we still used words like we. Back when Celine still held my hand during grace instead of sitting beside a man who wore my cologne and my seat like he'd earned them. Royce. His name fit too well, sharp, arrogant, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than our wedding cake. He didn't speak. He just swirled his wine like he'd been here before. Maybe he had. My four-covered Madeira, roast lamb half-cut. Her words didn't match the smell of thyme and rosemary still rising from the plate. I remember thinking, oddly, that I had brought that wine. The bottle of 2017 Malbec she once said reminded her of our honeymoon. I'd chosen it deliberately. Half nostalgic, half habit. I'd expected maybe a conversation about where we'd gone wrong. Maybe a warning. Not this. Trisha, her mother, sat at the end of the table like she was presiding over a damn ceremony. Chin tilted, pearl necklace glinting under the chandelier like it was part of some aristocratic armor. "Don't make a scene," she added, smiling like she'd won a bet. "You're better than that, Rowan." "Am I?" I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. My eyes went back to Celine. My wife? No, not anymore. Not after those words. Not after that look. She had always been beautiful, and even now, in betrayal, she glowed. But I saw it for what it was. Not beauty, not grace, just performance. I could tell by the way she tilted her head slightly, waiting for me to respond, to shout, to throw something, to make her look like the victim in whatever story she'd already prepared for social media. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys. The ones with the leather tag I had engraved when we first moved in. Our initials, still joined together like they mattered. I placed them on the table. Not tossed, not slammed, just placed, gently, like setting down the final piece of a puzzle. Celine's eyes flickered, confused, maybe. Disappointed, definitely. Royce shifted in his seat like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if it was his turn yet. And Trisha? She blinked, just once, like she had expected more fireworks. I adjusted my sleeves, stood up slowly. The chair legs didn't screech. I made sure of that. If they wanted a scene, they wouldn't get one from me. The silence stretched. I walked past Royce without looking at him, though I felt the smugness radiating from his skin like aftershave. I passed behind Celine and almost paused. Almost. But no. My shoes tapped evenly on the hardwood floors I had chosen, stained, and sealed myself. Every echo reminding me that I had built this house. Brick by brick, payment by payment, weekend by weekend. And now they thought they could just erase me from it. I didn't say a word. At the door, I stopped only to button my coat. The air outside had dropped to the kind of chill that curled around your collarbones. But I welcomed it. Cold meant clarity. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the street was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. Or maybe it was something else, something deeper. A hum. A shift. A starting line. They thought they'd ended something. But all they did was flip the switch. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that I'd been preparing for this dinner for months. Not the betrayal. No, I didn't see Royce coming. But I had seen the signs. Missed calls. Locked phones. Trisha's sudden uptick in drop-ins. Celine's habit of rewriting small memories during conversations. "You never fixed the gutter," she'd say, when I had. "You always forget the red wine," she'd mutter, even though I didn't. Tiny lies, piled neatly into a narrative I didn't recognize anymore. So I had started preparing, not with confrontation, but with records. Paper trails, documents, ownership files, title histories. Everything they never cared to understand because they assumed I was just the quiet one, the safe one, the boring one who filed things and stayed out of their way. But that's the thing about quiet men, we don't raise our voices. We raise foundations. As I stepped into my car, I let out the smallest breath. Not a sigh, just release. I looked at the house one last time. The porch lights were still on. The curtains still drawn the way she liked them. A shell now. Beautiful, yes, but hollow. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't even think about going back in. I drove away with my hands steady on the wheel, my mind already clicking into motion. Because what they didn't know, what they wouldn't learn until morning, was that the house was mine. Not metaphorically. Not sentimentally. Legally. I had bought it under my holding company. Quietly. Smartly. And I never transferred the title. Not once. That dinner? That was their last meal under an illusion. For me, it was just the appetizer. The silence they mistook for surrender was a strategy. And the door I walked out of? That was their exit, not mine. The phone rang at 9:07 a.m., just as I was stirring honey into my tea. My mornings had always followed a quiet rhythm. Emails, tea, and the scent of lemon balm drifting through my apartment. But that morning felt different before I even answered the call. The kind of calm that only comes before a storm, if you know how to listen. Good morning, this is Liberty Mortgage Group. We're calling about the $780,000 transfer request tied to RKM Properties. Rowan Malik, correct. I smiled into the steam rising from my mug. That's me. The woman on the other end hesitated. We just wanted to confirm, this property isn't under the occupant's name. It appears there's a freeze on any refinancing or ownership change until this is verified. Correct, I replied. The freeze stands. No action should be taken without written consent from the principal partner. That would be me. She paused again, professional but clearly curious. Understood. Thank you, Mr. Malik. You'll receive a confirmation email shortly. I ended the call, refreshed the lemon slice floating in my tea, and waited. The first ring came at 9:11. Trisha. The second came at 9:13. Trisha again. By the fifth ring, I turned my phone face down and let it buzz across the counter like a mosquito looking for blood. 19 missed calls from Trisha in total. One voicemail I didn't bother opening. And then, at 9:28 a.m., the message came from Celine. What did you do? 3 words. No punctuation. No, hi. No, good morning. Not even fake politeness. Just that raw little flare of panic packed into a digital envelope. I took a screenshot. See, the thing about Celine was she never paid attention to the details. She liked big gestures, designer furniture, curated dinner photos. But contracts, deeds, ownership documents, that was boring stuff, my stuff. I had spent the last 7 years filing every receipt, recording every purchase, handling all paperwork under my company. She had never once asked about the title. She just assumed. Assumptions have price tags. The house she had so boldly claimed over roast lamb and red wine didn't legally belong to her. I'd never transferred the deed from my company, RKM Properties. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I've never believed in gambling with real estate, especially not marital real estate. Everything was structured through my LLC for asset protection. It wasn't secrecy. It was diligence, professionalism, and in hindsight, it was insurance. They thought I'd just walk away, that I'd hear her say those words, this house belongs to me and my new husband now, and crumble. But the thing about being underestimated is, it lets you build without interruption. It's the silence in which architects draft entire cities. At 10:42, I finally checked my voicemail. Trisha's voice was urgent, clipped, and brimming with the indignation of someone who just discovered their favorite boutique was permanently closed. Rowan, call me back. There's a misunderstanding with the house. They're saying you still have control. Look, Celine's upset, and Royce is, well, just call me. Please. Please. That word had never sounded so unfamiliar coming from her. At 11:07, I received an email from the mortgage company confirming the temporary freeze on refinancing or ownership transfer attempts. The best part? It was triggered automatically once the back-end system flagged a mismatch in the occupant name and deed registration. Royce had clearly tried to refinance or shift something that morning. Probably wanted to add himself to the title. Maybe even take out a loan to cover all the renovations I'd heard him brag about. I could picture him walking into a bank, dressed to impress, pitching himself as the new owner, only for the rep to smile awkwardly and ask if he had permission from the company who actually owned it. I didn't need cameras to see the looks on their faces. Royce, red-faced and loud. Trisha, fuming and pacing. Celine, spinning her lies into little webs that couldn't stick to anything solid. I kept silent. At 1:12 p.m., a different kind of message came in. This one from a contact at City Records who owed me a favor from a zoning dispute I helped resolve last year. He'd overheard Royce asking questions, loudly, about ownership history, trying to dig for leverage. That was Royce for you. All confidence, no caution. He never even stopped to think that maybe, just maybe. The man he dismissed at dinner was the architect behind the entire blueprint they were trying to steal. By 2:30, Celine had finally gotten bold enough to call directly. I didn't answer. I simply typed one line in response to her earlier message. Everything is exactly as it was. You just never looked. No emotion. No threats. No gloating. Just facts. They thought this was about revenge. But it wasn't. I wasn't burning anything down. I wasn't screaming. I was simply flipping the folder open and letting the document speak. It was never about holding onto the house. It was about holding on to truth. The truth was, I'd done everything right. I paid in full. I structured legally. I protected assets. I kept my name out of noise and let the paperwork do the talking. So when Royce tried to move in, when Trisha tried to reroute the utilities, when Celine strutted through the house claiming ownership with a man I didn't even know 2 months ago, it wasn't revenge when the locks didn't work anymore. It was boundaries. I spent the rest of the day in my home office, the one they thought I would never need again, reviewing property reports. Not theirs. My next acquisition. A triplex across town, under renovation, perfect for passive rental income. Because life moves forward when you're prepared. That night, as I poured myself a glass of the same wine we'd shared the night before, the bottle I retrieved on my way out, by the way, I scrolled through the texts again. 19 missed calls. 1 voicemail. 2 texts. Panic wrapped in entitlement. And me? Calm. Because the difference between anger and preparation is the receipt. He's boring. He just files things. That's what they used to say at dinner parties, usually when they thought I'd stepped away. Sometimes they'd whisper it like it was a shared joke. Other times they'd just say it aloud, like I wasn't even in the room. Rowan's quiet. He's dull. He files contracts and invoices. Trisha said it first. Celine repeated it like a chorus. Royce, before he was Royce the homewrecker, used to chuckle and echo it like it was clever. What they never realized is that I was listening. Always listening. I heard every side comment, every smirk passed over wine glasses, every sigh when I brought up amortization schedules or property tax exemptions. They wanted noise. Flash. Someone who lit up a room with charm. That wasn't me. I didn't wear expensive watches or brag about quarterly bonuses. I wore silence the way others wore cologne, with purpose. The truth is, they never bothered to learn the story behind the man they mocked. Yes, I file things. I file property deeds, zoning board approvals, contractor invoices, lease agreements, HUD disclosures, permit receipts, and asset protection addendums. I file because paper tells the truth when people lie. And while they were laughing at my boring habits, I was stacking ownership like bricks. I work as a senior acquisition analyst for 3 property firms across 2 states. I help them determine which lots to buy, what old buildings are worth saving, which corners are due for gentrification. I make quiet recommendations that become million-dollar returns. I see value in dirt before it's paved. I watch neighborhoods like traders watch stock tickers. But that's not even the best part. On the side, I own a personal LLC, Arkham Properties. I founded it 6 years ago, right around the time Celine said she wanted to feel like she owned something too. I smiled, agreed, and let her redecorate the house. But I kept the title. Because I wasn't just a husband. I was a strategist. I bought the house we lived in under RKM. Cash purchase. Clean title. No lien. I listed myself as managing partner and sole signatory. I even had the foresight to structure it in a way that limited any claim by a spouse in case of separation or remarriage. I didn't do it out of mistrust. I did it because I learned early on from men who lost everything that love should never mean abandoning your logic. 6 homes. That's what I had. Not just one. The house Celine claimed wasn't even my crown jewel. I owned 5 more within a 15-block radius. One was an Airbnb that brought in steady income from business travelers. Another was a duplex with long-term tenants, sisters who ran a bakery and always paid rent early. One house I leased to a nonprofit that helped veterans transition back into civilian life. Quiet investments. Smart ones. All structured, protected, layered under shell entities and legal scaffolding they never cared to ask about. When I talked about these things at family dinners, they changed the subject. When I mentioned renovations, or insulation grants, or tax depreciation, Trisha would yawn. Celine would pick lint off her blouse like I was reciting poetry in a language she didn't care to learn. I stopped trying to impress them. Not because I had nothing to offer, but because their applause was never the metric I cared about. There's something almost delicious about being misread for so long. While they mocked my quiet nature, I was buying time. While they laughed at my spreadsheets, I was outlining exit strategies. While Royce was busy being charming in rooms that weren't his, I was owning the ground beneath them. Celine used to complain that I didn't surprise her anymore. But the truth is, she never asked the right questions. She thought she married a man who paid bills and filed things. She never realized she married the man who owned the walls around her. I didn't have to shout it. I had the papers to prove it. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about self-respect. I watched Royce walk into the picture like he'd stolen a crown. But he didn't know it was made of paper. Legal paper. Filed. Stamped. Protected. And now it was crumbling in his hands because he never bothered to learn who he was stealing from. People mistake presence for power. They mistake silence for submission. But I've always known the loudest leverage comes from what's already been signed, not said. I still remember the first house I ever bought. I was 28, working late hours and living off black coffee and Subway sandwiches. It was a 2-bedroom fixer-upper with mold under the sink and a roof that groaned every time it rained. But it was mine. I walked through it with my notepad, taking notes on every crack and creak like a man cataloging hope. And I fixed it. Slowly. Thoroughly. With my own hands and hired help when needed. I rented it out within 6 months and used the equity to buy the second. That became a pattern. Work, save, reinvest. No shortcuts. No handouts. Celine never saw that version of me. By the time we met, I was polished. Dressed better. Paid better. Quieter. She liked the stability. She just didn't like the man who created it. She wanted the end product, not the process. That's what stung the most. Not that she left. Not even that she brought another man to our dinner table. What stung was how confidently she believed I had nothing to fall back on. How easily she assumed I would vanish because she told me to. But I didn't vanish. I stepped back into my own skin. I revisited every file, updated every tenant log, reviewed every ledger. I called my accountant, checked my trusts, realigned insurance policies. Not in panic, but in rhythm. Because I'd never stopped building, even while she was tearing us down. The house? That was never a gift. It was an asset. Celine? She was never just a wife. She was a chapter. And me? I wasn't the boring one who filed things. I was the architect of the story they never learned to read. Actually, sir, this property is registered under Rowan's company. That single sentence from Maya Adesina sliced through the courthouse lobby like a scalpel. No shouting. No drama. Just precision. The man Trisha had hired, some mid-tier attorney who strutted in with his monogrammed briefcase and too much cologne, froze mid-sentence. His jaw twitched. I saw the moment his confidence cracked. He had walked in ready for war, armed with half-truths and emotional theatrics. What he hadn't brought. Facts. Trisha blinked, as if her world had been spun backwards. Her red nails tightened around the folder in her hand like it might grow teeth and defend her. That's not possible, she snapped. The house is Celine's. It was a gift. Maya didn't flinch. She adjusted the cuff of her slate gray suit and smiled politely. A gift must be legally transferred to be valid, Ms. Jennings. This one wasn't. Celine stood to the side, quiet for once. Her lips parted like she wanted to interrupt, but no words came. Royce, behind her, looked like a man who'd just bet the farm on a bad hand and couldn't decide whether to run or bluff. I leaned against the marble column, arms folded. Maya had it from here. That was the agreement. I'd already sent her every document. Title records, purchase contracts, the original filing with RKM Properties, and the prenuptial addendum Celine had once signed with such casual disinterest. She hadn't even read it back then. I remember watching her skim through the packet the night before our wedding, glass of champagne in one hand, nails drying on the other. Just tell me where to sign, she'd said, more focused on her lipstick than the clause that would one day undo her illusions. Now, Maya read it aloud, her voice clear and deliberate. Clause 14. Spousal relocation or remarriage voids all shared property claims unless legally revised and notarized. She paused. There is no such revision on file. Celine's mouth finally moved. That clause wasn't explained to me. Maya raised an eyebrow. It was in bold font. Page 6. And your initials appear next to it. Twice. For the first time, I saw Royce truly process what was happening. His gaze moved to Celine, then to the floor, then back to me. Like he wanted to say, you planned this, but knew better than to give me that satisfaction. He wasn't wrong. I didn't plan her betrayal, but I did plan for my protection. That's the thing about people who underestimate you. They never imagine you'll outthink them while smiling. The courthouse echoed with silence thicker than any gavel strike. Trisha tried again, clutching at narrative straws. But she lived there. She made it a home. That has to mean something. It does, Maya replied calmly. It means she had a place to stay. Not that she owned it. Celine's composure cracked then, just slightly. Her chin trembled the way it used to when she got cornered in a lie, but didn't want to admit it. She turned toward me, maybe expecting me to step in, to offer some olive branch like I used to when her mother overstepped or her sister picked fights. But I remained still. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to confirm. When they filed their petition to force a transfer of ownership, they assumed I'd panic. They assumed the quiet man wouldn't fight. What they didn't expect was Maya, my longtime attorney and former Harvard law classmate, arriving with a binder thicker than their entitlement. Trisha's lawyer tried pivoting. Even if the property is under Mr. Malik's company, Your Honor, he said, nodding toward the county registrar who'd joined the discussion, there's the matter of equitable interest. She lived there, contributed to. Maya opened another folder. Her contributions were aesthetic. She purchased decor, which Mr. Malik's accounts show were reimbursed as spousal expenses. Utility payments were made from a joint account, of which Mr. Malik was the sole funder. There is no financial trail supporting ownership or investment from Ms. Jennings. Boom. That was the kill shot. Not cruel, just clean. Celine took a step back. Royce muttered something under his breath and turned away, as if distancing himself might absolve him of all this. But the room didn't care. Truth doesn't require an audience to settle in. I thought, briefly, about speaking up, about saying something, anything, that would give this moment a dramatic flair. But no, that wasn't me. I had said what needed to be said already, just not with my mouth. I said it with every paper I filed, every decision I made to build without boasting. I said at the moment I placed those keys on the table and walked out without slamming the door. My voice had been in every step of this journey, just not the way they understood. Eventually, the courthouse staff began to disperse, and the registrar nodded respectfully toward Maya. Everything appears in order. No further action needed. Title remains unchanged. And just like that, the illusion broke. As we stepped outside, the sun hit hard. One of those bright, indifferent noons that didn't care about human drama. Celine trailed behind us. Royce pacing near the parking meter, Trisha whispering furiously into her phone like she could still summon a miracle. Maya handed me the folder. You're clear. Let me know if they push further. But I doubt they will. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Not just for today. For all the days before this when she'd warned me to protect my name. Celine caught up to us at the curb. Rowan, she said, soft now. You really meant to leave me with nothing? I turned to her, looked into eyes that once made promises. No, I said. You left yourself with nothing. I just didn't stop you. She blinked, stunned by the gentleness of it, as if she expected rage, regret, some signal that I still needed closure. But I didn't. This was it. Right here on the sidewalk outside a county courthouse. Closure wrapped in documents and silence. Royce called out, let's go, like he still had control of something. I walked to my car. I didn't look back. I thought you said it was your house. Royce's voice cracked through the air like a crowbar against glass. We weren't in a courtroom this time. We were in a parking lot, outside Bancorp Credit Union, where he had just made an ass of himself in front of the branch manager, 2 security guards, and a visibly uncomfortable loan officer. His face was flushed with rage, confusion, and something else I'd seen brewing behind his eyes for weeks, fear. The kind of fear that doesn't come from danger, but from embarrassment, from being caught bluffing with no cards in your hand. Celine stood beside him, lips pressed thin, arms crossed, trying to play it calm while her world burned from the inside out. And Trisha sat on a concrete bench nearby, sunglasses too large for her face, trying to pretend she wasn't related to either of them. I watched the scene unfold from the corner of the parking lot. I was parked 2 rows away in a rental, tan, discreet, windows slightly tinted, coffee in hand, legs crossed, sunglasses on. The morning sunlight danced off the windshield while Royce gestured wildly, waving a folder that looked thin and unimpressive. I didn't need to hear the details to know what had just happened. He tried again, tried to claim ownership, to update records, to assert control over a property he thought was his because Celine told him it was. Maybe he thought showing up in a suit and speaking with just enough arrogance would intimidate the staff into bending the rules. Maybe he thought the name Royce Langston carried weight. It didn't. Not here. Not in a system governed by titles, signatures, and receipts. The house was still mine. Locked up tight. Legally, financially, structurally. What Royce didn't realize, what none of them had realized, was that there's no bluffing when the ink has dried and the numbers align. He had dropped $60,000 into renovations over the last few weeks, landscaping, interior staging, even a new sound system in the media room. His receipts didn't matter. His rage didn't matter. You can't renovate your way into ownership. He spun toward Celine, voice rising. You said you talked to the mortgage company. You said everything was fine. I thought it was, she snapped back, as darting toward the bank doors. Rowan never said anything about. That's because he doesn't talk, Royce barked. He just watches and waits until you fall into the trap. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled at that. Not out of malice. Out of recognition. Because he was right, in a way. I don't yell. I don't demand. I build nets with numbers and wait for gravity to do its job. They tried to change the locks last weekend. That was the first sign they were desperate. The locksmith apparently arrived, walked through the process, then called the listed property owner for verification. That call came to me. Just doing routine confirmation, the man had said. No problem, I told him. But they're not the owners. Not tenants, either. If they proceed, that's an illegal entry. Click. No new locks were installed that day. Just confusion. A frozen moment where their plan started to rot from the inside out. Now, in the parking lot, Royce looked ready to explode. But explosions don't fix paperwork. They just leave more pieces to clean up. He marched toward the bank doors again, only to be intercepted by one of the security guards. Calm words were exchanged, and then Royce, still muttering, stormed off toward his car. A matte black BMW. Probably leased. Probably already behind on a payment. Celine remained on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself now. She stared at the pavement like it had something to offer. An answer. A way out. But she'd built this maze herself, and now there were no exits. She had believed that if she moved fast enough, replaced me quickly enough, she could reframe the story. That her new husband and her old home could be photographed together like an upgrade. But the paperwork hadn't changed, and her assumptions couldn't override due diligence. Trisha finally stood, brushing imaginary dust off her blouse. We need to leave, she said flatly. But Celine didn't move. She turned slightly, scanning the lot. Her eyes caught mine. I didn't flinch. I didn't wave. I just held her gaze through the windshield. Expression calm, unreadable. She stared like she didn't recognize me anymore. Like she was finally seeing something she'd ignored for years. You see, I'm not a loud man. I don't need to slam fists or raise my voice to make a point. I prepare. I build systems that outlive betrayal. I draw lines with legal ink and surround my life with quiet walls of logic and foresight. Royce was the noise. I was the infrastructure. That morning, while they were unraveling outside the bank, I had already submitted the notice of restricted access to the title company. I'd also forwarded the prenuptial enforcement documents to the HOA board, just in case they tried any more moves under the radar. And as an added measure, I had changed the alarm code from the app on my phone. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because it was mine. Because when someone tries to erase you from something you built, you don't argue. You don't scream. You just open the drawer, pull out the receipts, and let gravity do its work. Royce's meltdown wasn't the end. It wasn't even the worst part. It was just a chapter. A loud, ugly, inevitable chapter. What came next would be quieter, but louder in consequence. Lawsuits, maybe. Please. Apologies wrapped in half-truths. I was ready for all of it. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. What they didn't understand was that silence, when earned and wielded carefully, becomes its own kind of justice. As I watched them finally leave the lot, Royce speeding, Trisha scowling, Celine glancing back one last time, I finished my coffee and placed the empty cup in the console. Then I started the car, pulled out slowly, and headed toward my next appointment. An architect. I was thinking of renovating the house myself, once they were truly out. Not for resale. For a future I'd design on my terms. Because while they were arguing over who owned what, I'd already moved on to building what came next. I gave you that house as a gesture, but now it's business. I said those words aloud the night before I changed the locks for good. Not to Celine. Not to Royce. Just to myself, standing in the middle of what used to be our living room. The fireplace flickered like it remembered the quiet nights and forgotten laughter. The crown molding I'd installed by hand stretched across the ceiling, neat and precise, just like I'd planned it. Everything still looked the same, but it felt hollow. Familiar shapes occupied by unfamiliar shadows. The truth is, I had never truly given her the house. Not in the legal sense. Not even in the emotional sense. I gave her the illusion of ownership, the comfort of control. I let her hang the art, choose the color schemes, host the housewarming. I watched her smile during those moments, glowing like a woman who believed she had built something. And I didn't correct her. Not because I was weak, but because I thought partnership meant letting someone feel powerful, even if it came from borrowed bricks. For years ago, I bought this house in cash. It was a Thursday morning when I signed the purchase agreement, 11:14 a.m., to be exact. The seller was retiring to the coast. No fuss. Quick sale. Clean papers. I wired the money from RKM Properties, my company, and by lunchtime, I held the title. I remember driving straight from the title office to meet Celine for dinner. She was already 2 margaritas in and glowing from a spa day she'd paid for with my card. I told her we had a new place, and she gasped, tears catching in her lashes, hands clapping like a girl promised a pony. "You bought us a house?" she squealed. I nodded. "Yes, us." That was my first lie, a small one. One rooted in love, I thought. She wanted to feel like she had chosen the house. So I let her decorate it. I handed her the reins on the interior, lighting, fabrics, furniture. She ordered a chandelier from Italy that took 6 months to arrive. I never liked it, but I kept my mouth shut. She needed to believe this was her world, her domain. And I gave her that stage because I thought we were building something together. It didn't occur to me that she was building something else entirely. An escape route. One where she walked away with more than what she came with. But I had already built my safety net. I've seen too many men lose everything because they confused love with liability. My mentor, Bernard Hale, taught me that. A grizzled old investor with a crooked smile and a Rolodex full of hard lessons. Love loud if you must, he once told me. But own smart. You don't want to fight over land when the war comes. So I structured the purchase through RKM, making sure the deed stayed locked behind a corporate veil. Not out of spite. Out of principle. If something happened, divorce, debt, disaster, I needed that house to remain an asset, not a battleground. Celine never asked to see the paperwork. She was too busy painting bedrooms and posing for social media tours. "Welcome to our home," she'd say on her videos, spinning in front of the fireplace like a real estate influencer. I watched her closely during those moments. She believed it. That was the strange part. She truly thought the aesthetics added up to equity. That style could overwrite structure. But design doesn't touch the deed. Over time, I noticed the shift. She stopped thanking me, stopped talking about us, and started talking about what was hers. She became possessive of spaces she didn't own, defensive of decisions she made without my input. I let it slide for a while, chalked it up to ambition or nesting. But deep down, I felt the current changing. Then Royce entered the picture. I didn't know at first. He was introduced as a colleague, then a client, then a friend from the gym. But I'm not a fool. I watched them carefully, the way his name started surfacing in casual conversations, the way she laughed harder at his jokes than mine, even when I wasn't in the room. Still, I didn't confront. I documented. I reviewed the structure of RKM, tightened the trusts, rechecked the legal framework. I wasn't preparing for war. I was ensuring my foundation couldn't be shaken if one started. When she finally pulled the trigger, stood across from me at the Sunday dinner table and told me to leave, I felt nothing but confirmation. Not pain, not shock, just clarity. She thought she was enacting a plan. What she didn't know was that I'd already built mine. She was playing checkers in a game of chess that had started years ago. The house wasn't a symbol of our marriage. It was a lesson. About control. About appearances. About what happens when you assume charm can outmaneuver preparation. I stood in the kitchen that night, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. I turned off the Wi-Fi, canceled the utilities, changed the door codes. The final tenant agreements for my new renters were signed and scheduled. I looked around the room and thought about how she used to say, "This place feels like a dream." I wonder what it feels like now. I took one last walk through the rooms. My footsteps echoed, Empty house, clean walls, no furniture. Her designer chairs were already back in storage, waiting for a future that didn't include me. Her mother's rug had been rolled and hauled away, but the bones of the house were still mine, still solid. I paused in the entryway, looking at the space where we used to hang our keys. There was a small mark on the wall from where her purse used to swing and hit it each day. I never painted over it. Funny how the smallest things become the loudest echoes once everything else is gone. Then I locked the door behind me, walked down the front steps, breathed in the cool night air. The gesture was over. Now it was business. Rowan, please don't make this public. That was the text Celine sent me 3 days after the courthouse decision. 3 days after Royce's meltdown at the bank. 3 days after Trisha's lawyer quietly dropped all claims and stopped returning their calls. That message landed in my inbox like a late apology, urgent, embarrassed, trying to rewrite history after the ink had already dried. I didn't respond. But the public? Oh, they'd already noticed. See, the funny thing about paperwork is that when it goes to court, it becomes a matter of record. And when the person you're dragging through the mud happens to own a consulting firm that's contracted by the city, things get messy. Especially when local journalists comb through case files the way kids dig through cereal boxes looking for the prize at the bottom. One headline was all it took. City consultant illegally ousted from home by ex-wife and her new spouse. It wasn't clickbait. It was fact. Filed, stamped, and pulled from public documentation. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Trisha tried calling in favors, contacts on the city council, social club connections, her former business clients. But favors don't override documentation, especially when you're trying to rewrite a legal narrative in the age of screenshots. She wanted to contain it, minimize it, pretend it was a personal matter, a misunderstanding. But the words fraudulent eviction don't leave much room for interpretation. By the next morning, news vans circled the block like sharks scenting blood. I saw the footage while drinking my morning coffee, Celine ducking into a salon, oversized sunglasses failing to hide her face, Royce pushing past a reporter and nearly tripping on a curb. My phone buzzed every hour with interview requests, statement requests, even podcast invitations. Everyone wanted a piece of the man who never raised his voice, never made a scene, and still managed to flip the script with one set of documents. But I stayed quiet. Not a tweet, not a post, not a whisper to the press. I had no interest in stoking the fire. The fire lit itself the moment they underestimated me. The court filings were loud enough. The silence that followed? That was strategy. And still, the fallout came. Royce disappeared from LinkedIn. Just vanished. His profile, once filled with motivational posts and photos of him speaking on panels, went dark. Word on the street was he pulled out of 2 investor projects, quietly trying to liquidate assets before anyone connected the dots. Apparently, when you publicly embarrass a city contractor and get caught trying to claim property you don't own, people reconsider letting you manage their money. Trisha doubled down. Of course she did. She always believed she could outtalk consequences. She made vague statements online about being misled, documents being misunderstood, and legal discrepancies that don't reflect character. But no one cared. The court of public opinion had already ruled. And when that didn't work, she tried to play victim, posting a throwback photo of Celine and herself, captioned, "Even in storms, we stand strong." The comments didn't offer sympathy. They offered receipts. And Celine? She did what she always did when backed into a corner. She tried to pivot. She reached out to mutual friends, spun a softer version of events, blamed miscommunication, painted herself as a woman caught between 2 difficult men. But the truth had legs. And this time, it ran faster than her narrative. Then came the emails. "I know things got out of hand. We never meant to hurt you. You didn't have to make it so public. I thought we could talk." And finally, "Please, Rowan, stop this." But I hadn't started anything. I had simply refused to roll over. People don't realize that silence can be louder than any scandal. That saying nothing, publicly, while doing everything, privately, is more unnerving than 100 angry posts. They expected me to defend myself, to post screen grabs, to tell my side. But I didn't need to. The facts stood where I left them, quiet and permanent. That week, I got a call from a local journalist who I had worked with during a zoning project years back. Her name was Mina. Sharp, direct, respectful. "I know you're not looking for press," she said, But I want you to know this story struck a chord. We're getting emails from young men, divorced dads, even older folks who say they've been through something like this. You staying quiet? That's saying more than any interview could. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my office, watching the city stretch out beyond the window. The world moved on. The headlines shifted. Another scandal, another distraction. But my story stayed where it mattered, in people's minds. Not as gossip, but as a lesson. Celine had once said I was too passive, that I let things happen instead of taking control. But she never saw the difference between silence and surrender. I don't yell. I calculate. I don't post. I position. And I don't retaliate. I respond. On my own terms, in ways that echo long after the moment passes. She asked me not to make it public. But the truth is, they did that themselves. The second they tried to evict me from my own home. The second Royce paraded around a property he didn't own. The second Trisha's lawyer walked into a courthouse without reading the deed. That's when it went public. I was just the one holding the paperwork when the curtain dropped. They thought they were writing the final chapter. But I was still in the preface. The real story was just beginning, and I was the author now. That weekend, I drove by the house, not to go inside, but to see it one last time before everything changed. The locks had already been replaced. The security system updated. In a few days, the new tenants would move in, a young couple with 2 kids and another on the way. He was a teacher. She worked at the hospital. They were excited, grateful, respectful. Everything Celine and Royce were not. I left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter for them. Make it a home, not a stage. I also left the keys, the instruction manual for the security system, and a wine bottle with a ribbon around the neck. Celine always said the house had good energy. She wasn't wrong, but energy shifts, especially when it's reclaimed. As I walked away from that house for the last time, I didn't feel loss. I felt something sharper, cleaner, freedom. They were still scrambling to rewrite their parts. But I had already turned the page. Because the moment they underestimated me, they handed me the ending they never saw coming. And I didn't even have to speak. We can fix this, you and me. Forget Royce. That's what Celine said the moment she stepped into my office unannounced. Her voice was soft, calculated, like someone trying to sell regret wrapped in perfume and a silk blouse. She didn't knock. She just appeared, like a ghost dressed in memory. The receptionist had looked uncomfortable when she let her in, like she wasn't sure whether she was helping reunite a marriage or escorting an illegal complaint. But I wasn't surprised, not even remotely. I leaned back in my chair, hands still resting on the freshly signed lease agreement for the house she once called hers. It was poetic, really. The ink was barely dry. The new tenant, a woman named Layla, was scheduled to move in by the end of the week. A rising entrepreneur. Smart, quiet, kind. Someone who asked thoughtful questions about the property. Someone who reminded me that stewardship meant more than decoration and entitlement. Someone who knew the difference between value and vanity. Celine walked toward the glass conference room like she still owned the floor beneath her heels. Her makeup was subtle, curated. The kind she wore when she wanted to appear natural but still effortlessly in control. Her eyes had that damp shimmer. The kind that could pass for sincerity if you didn't know her better. But I knew her well. I knew the way her emotions arrived just in time. The way her voice dipped into a trembling whisper when the outcome wasn't bending in her favor. She was performing. For me. For herself. I was angry, she said, as I closed the file folder gently. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't answer right away. I reached over, turned the lease agreement so it faced her, and tapped it with one finger. That's the new tenant, I said simply. She moves in Friday. Celine blinked. Just once. Her lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came out. This office, I continued, is for business. In this house you tried to hand to another man, is no longer your problem. I made a mistake, she murmured, sitting across from me now, folding her hands like she was bracing for communion. I didn't know Royce would react the way he did. I thought you'd understand. I let that sit in the air a while. Understand? Understand what? That she kicked me out of a home I bought with my own money and signed over to no one. That she invited a stranger into my house and announced he was the new king. That she stood by while her mother laughed, while Royce smirked, while I was dismissed like a placeholder who'd outlived his usefulness. I do understand, I said finally. More than you think. She flinched slightly at the calmness of my tone. It was always the silence that got to her. The steadiness. She used to call it my poker face. But now, it wasn't about hiding emotion. It was about discipline. About being the one who could stay in control while others unraveled. "I miss you," she said then, almost in a whisper. I watched her closely. There it was, the pivot. The softening. The emotional bait. "You miss the version of me who didn't know better," I said. "The one who kept giving while you rehearsed your exits." She swallowed hard. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "No," I said. "You were trying to replace me. There's a difference." The sunlight poured into the room through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the gold trim on the bookshelf behind me. I remembered when she used to come here just to sit and talk, curled up in the corner chair with coffee while I worked. Back when our conversations felt like they meant something. Back when her eyes didn't scan the room like she was measuring what she could claim if things went sideways. "I thought we had more time," she said, voice cracking now. Time. I had given her 7 years. 7 years of protection, comfort, silence, and stability. 7 years of building a life around a woman who saw my calm as complacency, my generosity as weakness. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a sponsor with manners. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Celine," I said, standing now. She stayed seated, eyes glossy, jaw clenched like she couldn't believe the script wasn't working. This wasn't the man she expected. This wasn't the Rowan she could guilt into pausing. She thought I'd hesitate, maybe reach for her hand, say something sentimental, but I had outgrown that part of myself. Pain does that. Silence, too. It teaches you to stop explaining your worth to people who never intended to understand it. "You're really done," she said, like she was hearing it for the first time. I nodded once. "You finished it. I'm just living in the clarity." And then I did what she never saw coming. I walked out, left her sitting there in the glass conference room, surrounded by reflections of everything she threw away. She could see her own face in every direction, 10 feet of windows framing the woman who thought she could walk back into something she had burned. I didn't stop at the reception desk. I didn't turn to look behind me. I got in my car, pulled out of the lot, and drove straight to the lake house I'd purchased 2 months ago. Yes, 2 months ago. Long before the Sunday dinner debacle. Long before Royce moved in and declared himself king of a kingdom built on sand. I bought it quietly, under a different holding company. A small, modern space tucked behind a cluster of pine trees with just enough distance from the city to breathe. I hadn't told anyone. Not even my closest friends. It was my peace project. So I didn't respond. I didn't block him, either. I just let the message sit there, like a fishhook left dangling in still water. Let him wonder. Let the silence make him squirm. Because sometimes the best answer is none at all. And sometimes, the silence is louder than rejection. Instead, I forwarded the lease confirmation to the title company and arranged for the final keys to be handed over to Layla and her husband. They were expecting their first child. Excited, nervous, grateful. She had sent me a message the night before with a picture of the nursery wall she'd painted herself, sky blue with tiny golden stars stenciled near the ceiling. "We're calling him Eli," she wrote. "Thank you for giving us this start." I stared at the photo for a long time. This wasn't revenge. This was closure. I walked through the house one last time that afternoon. It was quiet, sunlight warming the newly polished floors. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the corners, and the sound of the baby mobile gently chiming in the second bedroom felt like a soft breath of peace. In the kitchen, I opened the last drawer, one that Celine had always insisted on keeping cluttered with takeout menus and unused wine keys. It was empty now, clean slate, except for one thing I had brought with me from storage. The baby crib, the one Celine had ordered 3 years ago during a brief spell when she said she wanted kids. She had gone all out, designer labels, imported wood, a registry full of overpriced, unnecessary accessories. She never used any of it. The idea had come and gone as quickly as her moods did. When I brought up starting a family again 6 months later, she'd shrugged. "I'm not ready. Maybe I won't ever be." I had kept the crib anyway, not because I was holding on, but because something about it felt like a symbol of all the things she said she wanted but never truly valued. It sat in storage for 3 years, disassembled, untouched, waiting. Now, it sat perfectly reassembled in a quiet room with starlit walls, waiting for a child who would be born into love, not illusion. Layla didn't know where it came from. I didn't tell her. Just left a note taped gently to one of the bars. "May your son grow strong where peace lives." When I stepped outside, I didn't look back. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. The house wasn't mine anymore. But the story behind it was. And I had rewritten the ending. That night, back at the lake house, my phone buzzed again. Royce. This time. I know you're mad. Let's talk like men. No drama. We can still profit from this. I laughed. Not the bitter kind. Not the hollow, angry kind. A real laugh. The kind that bubbles up when you realize how far you've come. He still thought this was about money. That I'd sit across from him and negotiate like we were equals. Like we were two guys who hit a bump in the road and could shake hands over a business deal. But we weren't the same. He saw a house. I saw a betrayal. He saw square footage. I saw years of silence, investment, intention. He thought a flip could fix it. That plaster and paint could overwrite the foundation. He cracked the moment he walked into my home and smirked. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Instead, I opened the real estate app one used to track my properties and finalized the listing update. The house had sold earlier that week for $1.3 million. Above asking. All cash. No contingencies. The buyer? A Nigerian couple. Newly relocated from Toronto. The husband was a software architect, the wife a pediatrician. Their youngest son had Down syndrome, and they wanted a home with space for therapy equipment and a backyard for his sensory garden. They walked through the house twice, beaming. When they submitted the offer, they wrote a note. We've moved often. We want this to be the last move. We want to grow old here. I accepted their offer within 2 hours. I didn't tell Celine, or Royce, or Trisha. They'd find out eventually, either through neighbors or, more likely, another headline. The story had cooled down online, but people still whispered. Still wondered how the man they once dismissed as quiet, dull, a paper pusher, had pulled it off without ever raising his voice. The truth is, I never pulled anything off. I just paid attention. While they were watching Instagram Reels, I was watching market trends. While they were giggling over wine, I was laying legal groundwork. While they were assuming silence meant softness, I was preparing for the day they'd try to take what was mine. Royce tried again the next day. 1.3 M? You serious? You could have let me in on that. We both could have won. I stared at the message. That word, we, hit wrong. There was never a we. He was a thief with good shoes and a confident grin. A man who walked into another man's life thinking charm could outbid integrity. A man who learned too late that not all silence is submission. Some silence is strategy. Some silence is survival. And sometimes, silence is the clearest no you'll ever get. I turned off my phone. Walked down to the lake. Watched the breeze move across the water like a whisper meant only for me. Celine was back living with her mother. Royce, from what I heard, was staying with a cousin across town while trying to revive a failing startup. The fallout had scattered them like dried leaves in the wind. Me? I was building again. Not just houses. Not just equity. But a life with depth. With purpose. I'd started speaking at small real estate workshops. Helping young professionals protect themselves. Teaching them what I learned the hard way. Not how to get rich quick, but how to move smart. How to insulate your peace. How to recognize love that's rooted in respect, not convenience. One of the students asked me recently, what made you start all this? I didn't mention Celine, or Royce, or the house. I just said, because sometimes what you build quietly is the only thing that'll protect you when the noise arrives. That's the lesson. And that's the legacy. So when Royce messaged me one final time, you win, I didn't respond. Because I wasn't playing to win. I was playing to heal, to rebuild, to restore. And I already had. You always had the power. You just never raised your voice. That's what Maya told me the night we shared a quiet dinner to celebrate the closing of the house sale. We were at a rooftop bistro overlooking the city. One of those rare, clear nights when the skyline doesn't just twinkle, it glows like it's proud of you. And maybe, in some small way, it was. Maybe the city knew I'd earned this piece. Sunday dinner looks different now. There's no tension thick in the air. No forced smiles or veiled insults. Just warmth. I invite friends over, real friends. We laugh over wine I actually enjoy. We pass dishes across the table like trust. No one performs here. No one sits on a throne they didn't earn. There's no Royce. No Trisha. No Celine. Just conversation. Real, unfiltered, ordinary joy. And I've learned that ordinary is the most sacred thing when you've lived with chaos disguised as elegance. I live in a smaller house now. A place by the lake with enough room for quiet and just enough space for company when I want it. No more echoing halls or rooms filled with decor, but no love. This home is mine, not because the deed says so, but because peace lives here. I make my coffee slowly. I read more. I keep the doors open when it's warm, and I let the breeze move through the house like it belongs here. Because it does. Because I do. Celine's been quiet. The last I heard, she's back at her mother's, trying to restart her massage business. She's posted vague captions on social media about growth and learning lessons, but I don't pay attention anymore. Her voice doesn't reach me here. Not out of bitterness. Just distance. Emotional and otherwise. It's strange, realizing someone you once tried to build forever with is now just a memory. Not even a painful one. Just a fact. Royce? Gone. Deleted socials. Rumor has it he moved states, chasing another venture, another opportunity. Maybe he's sitting in someone else's dinner seat now, smiling at a woman who doesn't know yet what I came to understand. Some men only perform affection as long as it serves them. But I'm not angry at him. He gave me the gift of clarity. Trisha tried calling me once after the sale went public. I let it ring. That was the last thread. And when I didn't pick up, it snapped. No fireworks. No explosion. Just a silence that meant, this chapter is closed. And me? I didn't get revenge. I got peace. And that's harder to buy than a house. I spend my Sundays now doing things that actually matter. Hosting barbecues for my neighbors. Volunteering at a financial literacy program downtown. Teaching young men how to protect what they build before someone tries to smile their way into ownership. I see the look in their eyes when I talk about asset protection, legal structures, and silence as strength. They listen not because I'm loud, but because I've lived it. One student asked me recently, "How did you stay calm through all that?" I smiled. Because I knew who I was before they tried to rewrite me. That's the part they never understood. Celine, Trisha, Royce. They saw my stillness and thought it meant I didn't care, that I didn't know how to fight. But the truth is, stillness is where strategy breathes. Stillness is where resilience sharpens its teeth. They thought they'd ended me, but all they did was hand me the pen, and I wrote myself free. I go to sleep now without rehearsing comebacks. I don't check my phone for sudden fires. I wake up rested. I eat slower. I laugh deeper. I don't just exist, I live. Fully, quietly, intentionally. Sometimes I walk along the lake, hands in my pockets, breathing in the life I never thought I'd have to rebuild from ashes. And I realize I'm not just healing. I'm whole. And no one gets to take that from me again.